We just got back.
But now, you know, I feel closed in up here. Oh. I said they're supposed to do surgery the 27th on my sinuses to take that blockage out. And I tell you, my chest is hurting so bad, I'm going to call I got some new doctors. The breathing doctor. I wanted to check me just to be sure. I don't want to.
Because once they do that, I can call it roto-rooter.
Well, he thought it was just cleaning out the sinuses, but when he looked up in there, he said, well, he said, you do have a blockage. He said, I'm going to look at it. If it doesn't appear you're breathing, I'll probably leave it. And I told John, I said, I want him to take it out while I'm in there. I do not want to have to go through this again.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you, take everything you need out, because you're not going to do this again.
Yeah, Tommy had polyps and all the stuff out. And since he had all that, and he has that nasal rinse he uses all the time, and so it's doing good.
The first time I had it done, and that's what keeps going through my mind, is that first time, you know, I was sick as a dog for 2 weeks afterwards. Couldn't get up, had a splitting headache, had to stay in the hospital because all I could do was vomit. They couldn't unpack it until I quit vomiting.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't quit vomiting until they unpacked it.
Yeah.
I told him, I said, if it's like that, you just might as well find some kind of medicine, because I said, I don't want to do that again. Oh no, they've changed.
Test.
And my sister had it done again, and she says, yeah, it's different than it was. They don't pack it like that.
I know they packed Tommy's, and then the next day, I think, we went and and it was fine.
Did Tommy have it done?
Oh,
Has he had it done but once or twice?
yeah, once, long time ago, and then they did it again, because they came back, and so, and then now, Dr. Scott, and he really, it did a really good job. Usually those rinses helps clear it all out and all
When
that
I
kind
had
of
it
stuff.
done after I got over the whole initial thing, it was great. It was getting over that.
Yeah.
But,
It was kind of claustrophobic because he had to wear the packing for, I think, a week.
Do
you usually wear this one when
I
you're-
had to put some kind of gel.
Yeah, just so it can hear on the.
She had a hard time
If not,
getting
the
that
only
crap out.
the only speaker is at the back, so our microphone.
So I don't know. I don't know.
If not, there'll be people texting saying they can't hear.
They got it out and
I went ahead and turned it on. Is that okay?
I got kind of claustrophobic because
Unless
can't
you want to
breathe.
turn it on.
Yeah.
And so you had to breathe through your nose, your mouth the whole time until they did it.
I hate breathing through my mouth. But,
What, you changing seats on me or what?
well, I
She
thought
knows
about
what I
sitting
mean.
on my I really said I feel better back there, because this kind of feels claustrophobic, especially when he gets in here.
Well, you know, it's kind of nice because I'm used to having Gene right there, so, you know, it's nice
You know,
having
I
another
think of him. I thought of him yesterday. I thought, you know, I just really miss him
Yeah.
being here. And when I was watching services the other night, and they kind of, usually you caught Gene's image and part of it.
Right.
No Gene sitting there.
Yeah.
And then if Brenda moves, my goodness, you know, it's going to be a lot of our old ones that from
Yeah,
from Broadview Heights.
Yeah.
I just hope he's happy where he's at, and his son can help him. And,
Well, at least he's around his loved ones, that's all that matters.
yeah.
Oh, I am so sleepy. If I nod off, I'm sorry.
You did what?
Well, we got back from our vacation yesterday,
Oh.
and the flight was late leaving, and the connection was late leaving, and so we got home about 10:30.
Yeah.
And of course, you had to do a bunch of stuff before you actually go. So yeah, so I'm
Give out.
I'm a little sleepy.
Well, do I need to sit back there so I can poke him?
Yeah.
Well, I'll
Hold her
come
up,
back
keep her
there
from
and
falling
sit.
over.
He won't mind. I'll just tell him I have to
I'm
keep
so
Donna
sleepy.
away.
Yeah, my eyes are closed. I'm just listening. I'm just listening. I'm
Oh, no, there comes
asleep.
Billy.
I'm not sleeping.
I'll get back here, because that way if I get sleepy, you can poke me.
Yeah, we'll go get yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, that one back there, you got a lot of separators in your Bible?
yeah, he put
Where do you put
something
mine?
somewhere.
Is that it?
Aha, thank you, y'all.
He
Look out
put you
for me.
right there. I was gonna sit by my husband, but you know when you get out of sitting by him,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
and in church, he stands back in the back, so I don't have the little guy here to keep me.
Yeah, awake. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, he keeps you awake, but I can't really listen to the lesson when I've got a little.
Well, see, and we've always had someone say, first it was Hunter, and now he's kind of grown up, and, well, has he grown up? And so now Elam has decided that he wants a therapist.
Well,
So, but we,
Liam is so cute.
I know, and he's pretty good.
yeah, which one is he?
He's the older boy of the selfish.
Yeah.
She's pregnant.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And Bailey's the baby.
I hope my kids never get pregnant again.
You have enough great-grandchildren for
Well,
everybody?
I got 2 grandsons that's not married, look at it, and 1 granddaughter that's not married. And I said, out of 13, I only had 2 kids. They need to cut it off. I said, I was just absolutely ready to kill my granddaughter. My daughter had back surgery, and she had a back set. She got some kind of infection into the back where they had to go in. So she's been in the hospital all week. And this granddaughter left her 4 kids with her husband, which locked his hands going to the hospital to set. Those kids have no correction on how to behave. And I told him, I said, there's no way I'm watching our kids. Till she gets them, I'm not watching them. And I really don't want to come to the house, and that's terrible.
No, I wouldn't. No.
But,
Well, I tell you, they need Cal there, the drill sergeant. Oh, my goodness.
well, Cal can do it. I'm going to bring all 4 of my grandkids, and you whip them into shape for it.
Okay.
But it's her
He's
keep
calling you a
them
drill
into
sergeant, Cal.
He used to telling people where to go when they don't ever, not obey it. So that was his job.
Yeah. She quit her job before she had this last baby, and she says, well, I'm going to stay at home mom.
Right.
I said, well, that's great. It's about time. Your mom don't need to have all these kids.
So whenever
She turned around and told me,
grammar school,
Yeah.
we never had field trips.
Right.
I just am not made to be a mother. I said, why did you?
Kids on field trip.
She had 4 of them?
I was traditional kindergarten.
And then she decided after that that
She
she
said,
was
I'm going back to work.
Line those kids
So
up.
she leaves here, she lives here, she takes her kids to Shawnee to get fed by royalty. And then she drives back to Mississippi to work, goes back and gets them, comes home, and does it all again. I said, you
She probably sees them about 2 hours a day.
she don't want them anymore.
That's what it's all about.
And if she has them, if she's by herself, she brings
Been
them
down, I
in.
won't behave himself.
And she walks in the room and that was stuff. Well, an hour later,
I
she
said,
was
see those alligators over
So
there?
we've just been doing.
Grab him by the
Go out there
feet.
with your mom while she
Over the
smokes.
bridge, it says, I want you to bite your head off, you're not good. I said, I've been good. Get about
Yeah,
I'll wake 'em up.
Laura's really had a hard time. They didn't go home yesterday. but
real
they
sure when I was
reported
serious.
in for- They're not sure what kind of infection it is.
But all the kids were laughing.
It's 9 years.
You know that, this little line, anything that we say they can hear, this,
No,
our
no.
grandson
And rightly so.
watches this, and
That's pretty. I had a blouse just like his recently. Well, it was a home yesterday.
Morning.
I just wondered, we weren't saying anything really bad. I mean, but anything that we're saying is really good.
I just hope she does, but it's not okay. She did it home.
How's that, buddy?
When are you coming to see me?
How's everybody this morning?
Hot.
Hot? It's hot in here. I'm gonna take this thing
I'm
off.
sleepy, you really want to know. Was that a polite, how are you doing, or do you?
They even took the fan out of here,
I
didn't
was
they?
asking when
Yeah, they
Sure
did.
they
did.
really wanted it.
There it comes.
Apparently they needed it somewhere else.
Is he going to go underneath that?
He's doing something entirely different.
He always
He's
says,
doing something
he
different.
always says his own.
Well, I don't have anything that he's doing different yet.
He'll tell you.
You guys ready to begin? Let's start with prayer. Heavenly Father, I give you thanks for this day, for the night of rest we've enjoyed, the opportunity to come again, to worship you, sing songs of praises to your glory, to hear the word spoken to us, that we may continue to refine our lives, that we may become profitable servants, and that we become an encouragement to each other. I ask you to bless us in our studies this morning. Let's look into your word, consider things that are taught in the light of your word, and then make application in our everyday lives. Let the world see Jesus through us. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Okay. Standalone lessons kind of thing. Come on in. We've talked before about the covenants. And we've talked about Satan. We even talked about Jesus' yoke and how it's easy and how it fits. So today we're going to do something a little different. I'd like to start out talking about introspection. Think about it. Now, how many times do you have somebody mention introspection to you?
I don't know what that is.
Okay.
It's probably a good time we talk about it.
Yeah. It's not even mentioned in the Bible, but the principle is. Intro, meaning into, and spectrum, from which we were to get spectacles or to see, means to look within. Okay. How often do we look within ourselves? Yeah. We're kind of used to taking a look at other people, and we evaluate what we see. We judge whether their actions are good, bad. Sometimes we judge their motives. But we're pretty good at looking around us, but not always so good as looking inside us. That's what I want to talk about today, is looking inside. Zheng Xin was an influential Chinese philosopher and an ardent disciple of Confucius. Lived about 500 years before Christ was born. And one of his sayings, for which he's famous, goes something like this. Every day I ask myself 3 questions. The first is, have I sinned in my thoughts today and actions towards others? So, most people, especially in the church, don't think much about the ancient times and whether people knew sin. But they did know what sin was. They didn't always define it the way God would define it, but they did understand the concept of sin. And I believe that even in the ancient world, there were many God-fearing people. I believe it was God-fearing people are saved by the blood of Jesus, because his blood reaches back to cleanse sins. And so those that lived as righteously as they could, and according to the principles that are found in the law of Moses, not the law of Moses itself, but the principles of the law, I believe that they were found righteous before God. So a lot of people think that if you're not a Christian, you're condemned to hell. I don't think that's true. So there were God-fearing people in every nation. And the interesting thing is, when Christianity came about, there were people in every nation ready to receive it. Okay? So we're good. So have I sinned in my thoughts and actions towards others? Make sense? Second question is, have I broken faith in any of my friendships? Friendship is I think, often misunderstood what friendship is. people of the world think friendship is people going out partying with and doing stuff of fun like that. But when tough times come, they sometimes have a tendency to not be there. The old adage, a friend in need is a friend indeed, means when you need a friend and the friend is there, he's the true friend. So it isn't just having a friend when the times are good and everything's going fine and you're at the top of the game. It's when things aren't going so well that you still have a friend, that you know that you have a true friend. And the third question was, have I tried to teach anything to others I have not fully learned and understand myself? So, am I blind going around trying to lead other blind people? So, do I understand? Have I learned it? So, have I learned the lessons that I'm trying to teach others? So those are three interesting questions.
What was the second one?
The second was, have I sinned in my thoughts and actions towards others? That's number two. Number three is, that was the first one. The second is, have I broken faith in any of my friendships? Broken faith in any of my friendships. And have I tried to teach anything to others I have not fully learned and understood myself? Good questions. It's a good exercise for us as parents, teachers. It's a good exercise for pastors and preachers. Especially a good exercise for those in politics. Those that would lead others. So, introspection.
And who did you say had these questions?
Zing, Z-E-N-G, Shen, S-H-E-N. Lived from 505 to 435 B.C. Ancient philosopher. So, how do we define this word? It's a good word. Introspection is defined as the observation or examination of one's own mental and emotional state, mental processes, and the acting of looking within oneself. In this, we take a look at ourselves, how we're feeling, how we're thinking, everything else. And it really involves looking at our internal values. Now, we've talked about values before too. And values are your gut reaction to stuff, how you react. And we develop these values fairly early. Personality is basically formed by age 3. Our values, though, aren't formed until later, but we begin forming them in the home with the parents. And also influencing them is the grandparents, their friends, their neighbors. And as the kids go off to school, they're influenced by teachers and other children. But your parents are still your principal. Then they get into junior high school. Guys, when they go into junior high school, it's interesting. Parents still have an influence. But teachers and teenagers, other friends, are having a large influence at that time. So the early years are very important for us. But their values are pretty much formed by the time they're about 12 years old, 13 years old. And I'm talking about that, their core beliefs and how they feel about stuff. So, is honesty important to them? All kids, fairness is important. Honesty may not be. But they understand the principle of fairness. And wait till they get a little bit older and you'll find out. But are they going to be honest? Are they going to be truthful? Are they faithful? These type of things are going into our core values. And once our core values are formed, they may be changed by different significant emotional events. young couple gets married these days, core values may not change much. They used to. But when they have a child, you may see and should see a change in their core values. Usually, that's when men finally stop being boys and become men. But you have children, right? When that first one came along, all of a sudden things changed, right? Your relationship with your wife changed. You now had a child. You now had to share her with the child, okay? As a child grows up, sometimes he doesn't understand that principle of sharing. But as he gets older, he matures and he learns it. So other things can change your core values. For men of my generation, and John's generation, Vietnam was a very significant emotional event. And it changed a lot of people's core values. So, some were changed for the better, some were changed for the worse. An accident can change your core values. Death of a loved one or a friend changes your core values. Typically when these things happen is when we do some introspection. So you wondered where I was going, right? So when do we do this introspection? Well, most of us don't do it deliberately. It just happens. But it usually happens some kind of event. And that's when we'll take our time and we'll think about what's going on in our lives, what's important, and what should I do. A lot of times, some type of a traumatic event like the loss of a job, okay? An accident, death of a loved one. These are what lead us to this introspection. Now, it's much easier for us to look at other people and do their introspection for them. It's a little more different for us. Take a look at over Psalms 139. The psalmist here is writing. This is a Psalm of David. Normally when you study 139, we're looking at the omniscience of God, how he's all powerful, all knowing, always present, how he's always powerful. And these are appropriate things to study from this. But look at verses 24. Look at 23 and 24. He says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. And see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." On another occasion, he wrote, "Consider my ways and turn my feet to your testimonies." Yeah.
Could you close the door? I was hearing you from hearing the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't. I have trouble hearing when there's background in place. Thank you.
All through the Psalms,
Thank you.
we hear David talking about searching me, helping me do this. And so my question to you, do you think David was a person that did a lot of introspection? And I believe he was. I mean, he was a shepherd. And what do shepherds have to do? Well, they can throw rocks. Okay. They can practice with their sling. They can lead the sheep to a new place. Occasionally, you might have to kill a lion or a bear, but that'd be a high point for the day, maybe for the week, maybe for the year. But they have a lot of time to meditate and think, and whereas we ourselves in our society today don't have that time and don't take that time. I probably did the most thinking in my life, where I did the most of that was when I was building a place in Colorado. And I commute every week. My days off in the middle of the week. I go up there and I work on a place, come back and go back to work, get some rest. But on the drive there, people says, don't you hate that drive every day? It's like a 4-hour drive. What do you do? I says, I think. I did. Sometimes I was thinking about what was going on at work. I was an instructor at the time, and how I'm going to deal with problem students, something like this. Sometimes I'm thinking about problems that we're having at church. Sometimes I was thinking about a lesson I was going to have to bring. Sometimes I thought about the relationship between me and my daughters, my wife. So there was a number of things that I thought about. So I was doing some introspection. However, it seems like the older I get, the less time I have for it. So now I kind of have to make myself do it. So the Bible doesn't use the exact word introspection, but it does talk about the concept frequently. So David gives us examples of it. Can you think of any other examples? Famous Bible characters. Well, we studied one not too long ago. What about Job? Think about Job. All the things that he went through. But he didn't sin before God. And when all of his children die in this calamity, when they're celebrating one of their siblings' birthday, and the raiders come in and take his camels and his oxen and everything else, and then he gets sores, everything else, Satan is just tempting him. But God had faith in Job. And Job talks to God about why all these things are happening and everything else, and he kind of questions him. God doesn't accuse him of losing faith. He just says, who are you to question me? When I set the stars, where were you? When I created the heavens and the seas, where were you? When I gave life to man, where were you? Who gave you your life? Who gave you all your stuff? Well, Satan said that God had set a fence around Job. God didn't. Job had built his own fence because he trusted in God. And in this, we see as others come try to help Job with their human reasoning, that Job remains true to God in his thinking. But there is introspection as he considers the different things they say, and then he answers them from within. So we see it. Now, in the New Testament, we're exhorted in Galatians 6 and 4 to examine our own work. Most people think this, well, they have a checklist. I'm doing this, I'm doing this. I'm okay, I'm doing all this stuff. I don't think that's the thought. He wants us to examine our thoughts, as in taking communion. Are we worthy to take communion? Yeah. The answer is no. Do you ever think about that? Every time you take communion, if you examine whether you're worthy or not, what's the answer got to be? No, I'm not. But we're thinking about Jesus as a sacrifice, and he overlooks our shortfallings because we're trying to walk in the light, and he forgives those things. In 1 Corinthians, that's where it says, then James uses the analogy of looking in a mirror to see ourselves as God really sees us. Turn over to James 1. Take a look at verses 23, 25. James is very practical. He starts out saying, Encounter it all joy when you encounter various trials. In James, first chapter, verse 2. Verse 3, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And he talks about how endurance has a perfect result. Talks about wisdom, not being double-minded. Verse 12, he talks more about persevering under trial. Okay, talks about temptation and the process that Satan goes through to drag us down. He talks about self-control here. And then in verse 23, well, let's start at verse 22. But prove yourselves doers of the word and not merely hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in the mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was, or he's forgotten what he saw. Introspection. Kind of like looking in the mirror, looking within ourselves to see who we are, what we're doing, and how well we're doing it. A fellow by the name of John Richard Foster, he's a theologian. He wrote a book called The Celebration of Discipline. If we hope to move beyond the superficialities, that's a good word, superficialities of our culture, including our religious culture, we must be willing to go down into the recreating silences, into the inner world of contemplation. This morning in the newspaper, in Peanuts, the comic strip, Charlie Brown's talking about different things, and Lucy says, he says, I forgot exactly what it was, but Lucy puts him in a little clump of trees and just imagines herself lost in the woods. And he says, it's peaceful here. Not having Lucy around must be peaceful. We've got to go into the inner world. And the Apostle Paul challenges us to get inside ourselves with these words in 2 Corinthians 13 and 5. Take a look up there. And I think you recognize all these scriptures, right? And sometimes we don't quite, I don't think we quite see exactly where Paul wanted us to go. That's 2 Corinthians. Makes it help to get the two out there. Somebody got that 2 Corinthians 13:5?
13:5.
Yeah, read that for me.
Examine yourself as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourself. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified?
Then he says, I trust that you will realize that we ourselves do not fail the test. So check yourself out. How you doing? It's hard to do. We deceive ourselves a lot. And we look around us in the world, and I see it all the time. People that deceive themselves thinking that they have abilities they don't really have. But they want to have those abilities, so they deceive themselves into thinking they have those abilities. They deceive themselves into thinking they have skills. Some people deceive themselves, think they have power. Okay. Some want to be popular. All these different things that Brother Russ talked to us a couple weeks ago are covetous, where they want things, and so they deceive themselves in order to get them. Politicians deceive themselves, saying, well, this is worthy over here, so I'll do this over here, so I can get that. And we see our children do it at the same time. Okay. It just seems to kind of be in our nature. Not that God created us that way, but we kind of just develop this. So get inside yourselves, examine yourselves. So let's talk about some questions of introspection. Am I in the faith? Am I walking by faith? Am I living by faith? Am I standing fast in the faith of the gospel? Or am I being influenced by the world? Am I deceived by religious error or by popular opinion? Am I just going along? Are they doing things at church that I don't really think are right, but I'm going along because if I don't go along, I'm going to get criticism? Are we being influenced by the world? And we are. Satan's out there working all the time with us. We've talked about his skills and how he does it. So we are being influenced by the world. But am I remaining in the faith? And John talks about walking in the light. And he talks about self-examination too, to make sure you're doing that. So the first question I would ask, am I in the faith? I can ask that of myself. I can't ask it of you. And I can't ask it of you. No, I do. But I can't ask it of myself. Second question. Is Christ living in me? It is possible to know all the answers without knowing Him who is the answer. Do we have brethren that know all the answers, but they don't really know Him? Can I make that statement about me? Do I have all the answers, but do I really know Jesus? And that's the question. We get concerned about what's politically correct, whether or not we're out of step, or the views of a well-known religious leader. These things aren't the standard. Jesus is the standard. Okay, so keep your eyes on Him. And we'll do a little introspection. Any comments? Are we doing introspection? Occasionally, right? So, when we get really sick on something, we have time to think a little bit, we might do something. Okay? Or are we overwhelmed by our pain? Okay? Are we taking time to do it? A lot of times when I drive by myself, when I was coming back and forth from Florida out here, I'd have a couple days there. You can't get talk radio every place. So I'd have hours when I could think. And that's when you go down, you get down, stir around there in the bottom there and see what floats the top and examine it and say, you know, that's, I'm not doing so well in that area. I need to do better. And so you decide to do something. Has anybody had an incident, significant emotional event that maybe changed your core values? Or made you really think about what was important? We've all had it. I don't know that we recognized it at the time, but it's all happened to all of us. But if we think back, we can probably see something in our lives that affected us. And we started making some changes. And the reason we made those changes is because we had to do some deep thinking. It's hard to do. Next question. Am I testing myself to be sure that I'm not disqualified? And that's what Paul was talking about. Paul translates the last scripture as disqualified as reprobate or failed the test. In a moral sense, it means is a person whose mind is perverted. Is our mind perverted on certain things? When we talk about perverted, we're talking about the unnatural. Men and men, women and women, adults with children, that kind of thing. But it doesn't just mean that. It means it's a deviate away from the true course. We need to examine ourselves to make sure we haven't failed the test. So, how do we test? Well, I'm a teacher. For y'all that don't know, I teach young people that want to be air traffic controllers their job. And we have different tests that they go through. And then we have 2 days of final examination where they have to demonstrate their skills and the fact that they've learned it. They're getting about 2 years of college with technical subjects in lab sciences. And they do that in about 3.5 months. It's intensive. All to come down, and they get a point, they earn points at the different tests along the way. But it comes down to the last 2 days where they run 3 air traffic control problems of an hour each. And they have to hit a cumulative grade of 70 or above to go to the next level of training, which will be in a facility. So, 69.99 fails. So why do we give them a test? Do they learn what they need to learn? Are they qualified to continue? I'll be honest with you. Those that pass our courses with a 70 to a 75, typically 60% of those people do not complete the course when they get to the facility, and they're washed out. Only people who are able to do this job almost perfectly are allowed to pass. Aren't you glad? How many here occasionally fly in an airplane? Or you drive by the airport where airplanes are flying over you, right? So you care, right? How would we know whether they've learned it or they have the skills unless we test them? How do we know if we're passing the test? Unless we examine ourselves, because nobody else can do it for us. We know by looking at the book and examining the Bible. The Bible gives us the answers, and it accurately gives us the score. The last question for introspection, and we're almost done. Do you know who you are? When people say, who are you to somebody, they identify themselves in different ways. So, Billy, who are you?
When someone asks me, my standard is I'm a man with a boy's first name.
Okay.
That kind of gives them my personality right there.
All right. So, there's a humorous response, okay, with a play on her last name, since her last name is Man, okay, but her first name is Billy. And so she, like my mom, has a tendency to say, I'm a man too. So, Flo, who are you?
I'm not Flo.
I know.
You're Florence. Florence.
But I only do this to get a rise out of her. Florence, who are you?
Well, I hope that I'm a Christian. I hope I'm someone who lives the way God wants me to. And I'm a mother, and I'm a wife.
Yeah.
I'm a gardener.
Okay. We all identify ourselves different ways. Okay, going. So, who am I? It depends on who's asking and what the occasion is. Okay. But that's a question we have to ask ourselves. Who am I? Let's not get in the mystical sense. Okay. Well, let's get real practical here. And I am an analytical guy. I analyze. Engineering type of guy. But I don't suffer the paralysis of analysis. I analyze and I make decisions and I move. So that's what we have to find in our students out there is people who are analytical in nature but don't have to study it and can't make a decision. They have to make quick decisions. If something isn't working, they have to recognize it's not working and then take action to correct it. They can't ignore a problem. So in a practical sense, an honest evaluation of our heart, our motives and our attitudes, our actions. It's possible to deceive others, but how many times in the Bible does it say, be not deceived? So we have to not just look and question things that are presented to us, but after we've got them, we've got to question, are we doing it right? That's it. So, did a lot more talking than I wanted to. Now, your thoughts on introspection. Any thoughts? Anybody? Is anybody here doing any regular introspection?
I always test myself when I'm questioning maybe something I'm thinking or doing, and I always put it in like, can I picture God doing this, you know?
Oh.
And that's how I pretty much judge myself, how I carry myself in life. If I can picture God doing it, and got a pretty good idea of what God's about, you know, and that keeps me kind of in perspective, you know. I'm not perfect by any means, but that's how I judge myself, you know. And
Well, it wasn't too long ago that young people were wearing rubber bands with WWJD on them. What would Jesus do? That's a good way. That's a good method. That's a good method. And wearing a rubber band on your arm, if they would remember it was there, okay. It probably kept a lot of kids out of trouble. They said, what would Jesus do in this situation? Okay. Is he going to react with a gut reaction, or is he going to stop and think for a second and react in a way that they're not expecting? Now, I was a manager and supervisor in air traffic control facilities. We had a union, and we had a lot of strong personalities. And occasionally, people would do things they shouldn't do. And you have to discipline them or train them. If it was a performance issue, I trained them. If it was a conduct issue, it was discipline. So, and they would get upset, say some hurtful things, make false accusations, trying to justify their actions. And if they could provoke you, and they were successful many times in provoking management and saying dumb things, doing dumb things, then they could come up with some sort of self-justification for what they did. Now, realize they knew they did wrong. But they're just like Adam and Eve in the garden. They're trying to duck responsibility, and they'll cast the blame on somebody else, or it was the situation, but it's not my fault. It's your fault for signing me the sector. Okay. That's where they're going. My job was not to overreact. And so I did. And so my nickname was the Sponge. Okay. That's what one guy labeled me. He's a sponge. He just doesn't react to anything. It's not true. I did. Okay. But I found by delaying my actions, my response, I could be more deliberate. I could plan out what I was going to do, and I used the same technique on my kids. My daughter, oldest daughter, had trouble getting home on time. And so she would come in late, and she'd be sneaking in the door and trying to tiptoe upstairs very quietly. And I would be sitting in the living room in the dark, introspecting. And I'd say, "I'm glad you're home safe, honey." And kind of a whisper. She'd hear me and stuff. And then she'd want to start on her excuses. And I said, "Oh, honey, don't worry about it tonight. Go on up, get a good night's sleep. We'll talk in the morning." So, who do you think got a good night's sleep?
You did.
I did. Of course, I didn't have to talk to her. I got to talk to her tomorrow morning. She's home safe. I get a good night's sleep. Did she get a good night's sleep?
She's really not thinking.
What was she doing during the night?
Retrospect.
Introspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Hope we did some good this morning. Introspection is useful for us. Okay? Dealing with your children. There are times when they need to pop right now. There are other times when you're going to want to delay it. Let their conscience work on them and softens them up. It makes it much easier for you later, okay? And it has more of an impression. All right? Thank you for your attention, and we'll go for next week.